China ready to talk Asian Monetary Fund to cut dollar dependence. Malaysia says an idea to establish an Asian Monetary Fund has caught the attention of the Chinese leadership, the head of the Malaysian government revealed. The Prime Minister believes there is no reason for his country, which is hurting from a strong US dollar, to remain dependent on the greenback. China is open to talks with Malaysia on a decades-old proposal to set up an Asian Monetary Fund that can reduce reliance on the US currency, Malaysian Prime Minister Anwar Ibrahim announced, quoted by Bloomberg. Anwar.
Passing day, as the world dumps the US dollar, more and more countries are turning to the Chinese yuan. Last week it was Brazil. It began bilateral trade in the yuan, and now Malaysia has announced its plans. Malaysia wants to set up an Asian Monetary Fund. Malaysia's Prime Minister is Anwar Ibrahim. He met with Chinese President Xi Jinping last week. Both leaders were in Hainan. Ibrahim informed his parliament about the discussions. He said he was the one who pushed for this idea. And I have some quotes from the Malaysian Prime Minister. When I had a meeting with President Xi Jinping, he immediately said, I refer to Anwar's proposal on the Asian Monetary Fund, and he welcomed discussions. There is no reason for Malaysia to continue depending on the dollar. So Malaysia wants an Asian Monetary Fund, and China supports the idea. But what purpose will it serve? It has two goals. Number one, replace the US dollar with an alternative currency. And number two, reduce reliance on the International Monetary Fund, the IMF, the lender of last resort for countries. The IMF bails out countries in economic distress. China and Malaysia want to build an alternative to the IMF. They want to kill two birds with one stone, create an Asian IMF and curb dependence on the US dollar. And in both ways, they challenge the United States. Because the US dollar is still the dominant global currency and the US government still has an outsized influence on the IMF, which also explains why China is interested in the project. Although it's not really a new idea, it was first proposed by Japan back in the 1990s. This was during the Asian financial crisis. Asian economies were under considerable stress then. There was a series of currency devaluations. It began with Thailand. It spread to Malaysia, the Philippines, Indonesia, even South Korea, which was this close to a government default. The IMF bailed them out, but it also imposed very tough conditions. There was a lot of discontent among Asian nations. They thought some of the IMF's demands were unfair, and that's when the idea of an Asian Monetary Fund was born. It was supposed to be a counter to the IMF, an institution to help Asian countries overcome financial challenges. But the idea never really took off. The proposal led to disagreements between Japan and the US. The US pushed back hard against the idea. No prizes for guessing why. The Asian Monetary Fund would have challenged the IMF. It would have weakened the American influence in Asia. So the Americans were not in favor of it. As for China, it was reluctant. It did not want to back Japan's proposal. So the plan was DOA, dead on arrival. But today it is being revived, and in very different circumstances. The American influence on the world is on the decline, and China is no longer a reluctant power. It wants to challenge American hegemony, and it's not shy of wielding its currency, the yuan, as a weapon. The war in Ukraine has also helped. It has contributed to the rise of the yuan. In Russia, for instance, the Chinese currency has already replaced the dollar. The yuan is now the most traded currency in Russia. Most of Russia's financial assets are now held in yuan. Earlier this year, Russia's finance ministry converted its assets. It developed a new structure for Russia's National Wealth Fund. And this fund now holds 60% of its assets in the Chinese yuan. The Bank of Russia is Russia's central bank, and it likes the yuan. The Russian bank now regularly advises citizens and companies to convert their assets, to move away from the US dollar and to switch to either the ruble or other friendly currencies like the yuan. That's the term they use, friendly currencies. So Russia is shifting. So are some ASEAN countries like Indonesia, Vietnam, and Cambodia. They're ditching the dollar. They're settling trade in local countries.
President Vladimir Zelensky, after he travels to Russia to meet with Putin. China rolled out a peace plan but failed to outline what would happen to Ukrainian territories Russia has taken by force. So can President Xi get the job done? Joining me now, KTTH Seattle radio host and U.S. Army combat veteran and Purple Heart recipient. Brian Suits is back. Welcome back, Suits.
Brass monkey.
That's absolutely right. Great flat top. So let us discuss what's wrong with China brokering peace. I don't have a problem with it. Do you have a problem with it? I didn't think so.
Well, obviously peace is better than war and the whole thing, but this is China trying to, reestablish their reputation worldwide after that black eye they got for releasing the bat suit fever. You can Google it, COVID. I'm pretty sure it affected the entire world for the past 3 years. And what, coming off the success of the weekend where they just brokered a impossible deal reestablishing diplomatic ties between Saudi Arabia and Iran, that's a big victory in its own. As I've been telling you, for the past year, since China owns 11% of Ukraine, they can go to Moscow and they can dictate to Putin what his conditions will be for an armistice, and Xi Jinping can call Kiev or go in person, and he can dictate to Zelensky. And he's the landlord. He owns 11% of Ukraine, mainly the arable land. And he can say, listen, here's what you're going to agree to. And that means the Russian-speaking parts of Ukraine, the Donbass and Luhansk, and especially the Crimean Peninsula, will probably remain in Russian hands, or there'll be a internationally, observed referendum, which is ironic that the Chinese would ask for that. But and we know how it'll go. The Russian-speaking areas want to be part of Russia, and that's what peace is going to look like.
So would that be how things slice up in 10 years after this unnatural conflict naturally concludes?
Well, it'll wind up with a DMZ-like situation between North and South Korea, very similar to that. There will be NATO bases in Ukraine, and, the implicit message will be, don't ever do that again. Naughty, naughty. Putin is the town rapist, and let's not do that again. And so, everybody gets what they their initial war aims were. So Putin gets his victory parade, and he gets another day off in Russia, per year. And we stop, drawing down our entire armory of ammunition and equipment and give it to Ukraine.
Suits, I just want to we have about 45 seconds. You and I both lost a good friend last week, Louis Largent, who was the music director at the legendary KROQ in Los Angeles when I met him when I was his intern. He was also the host of 120 Minutes on MTV. Louis and I flew to MTV on the same day with our boss, Andy Schoen, Brian Suits' childhood best friend. Your thoughts, Brian?
I miss the guy. He was one of the genuinely good guys in this crappy business called radio. Louis was he had a good heart from the heart out, and he really was that guy that you saw in 120 Minutes. He really was the guy that you want to hang out with and discuss music, at the bar, because he knew it all. He knew everybody.
Music better than anyone I've ever met. God rest his soul. I'm so happy that Brian and I were able to share some